Hi, my name is Azreen and I am a wAIHA patient. I was diagnosed in 2016 with wAIHA, and this is my story. I was at the time 28 years old. I was in my last year of pharmacy school. I was at the moment doing my rotations in the hospital. And what had happened was I started noticing that I was starting to feel very tired when I was walking around in the hospital doing my rotations. And that was kind of unusual for me because I was very, very active. I was working out almost 5 times a week, and even just basically like going up and down the stairs, I was pretty much hyperventilating. I'm like, this is not normal. And then the other thing that I noticed was my urine was almost brick red. So at that point, I was like, I was a graduate student, didn't have proper insurance. So I just went to the university's health center, and over there, I told the nurse practitioner what was going on. And then she decided, she looked at my urine, and then she was like, oh, you probably have like a UTI. And then she prescribed me Bactrim, which is sulfamethoxazole, and told me, okay, just take it and you can go home. So I started taking it, and when I took the medication, I started feeling even worse than what I was already feeling. Like, I couldn't even walk to my car from the front door of my house. Like, I felt like I was going to pass out. And at that point, I was like, okay, either this medication is making it worse or something really bad is going on. So that's when I decided I stopped taking the medication. I was like, I don't think this is working. I stopped taking the medication and I just continued on doing my rotation. But at that point, I kept noticing that I was just feeling more and more tired. And then my husband, who was a medical school resident at the time, he started noticing that I was getting, like, my skin was turning yellow, my eyes were turning yellow. So we decided, we're like, okay, we have to go see a doctor as soon as possible. So literally the week I finished my rotation, I had an appointment with my PCP. Went to my PCP, he did all the blood work, everything, and then he scheduled me for like an ultrasound of my liver because he thought maybe I contracted hepatitis or something, because the month before I was on an international trip in Qatar, where I did an international rotation in a hospital. So he thought maybe I picked something up over there. So, and then I went home, and then the next day when I was at the hospital, he at the hospital waiting for my ultrasound, he called me and he's like, I need you to stop what you're doing and I need you to go to the emergency room and get admitted. And he told me my hemoglobin at the time was 5.8. He's like, I need you to go get admitted right now. Your hemoglobin is not normal. So my husband quickly took me to the emergency room. I was admitted there. They started doing the workup, everything. And by the end of the night, my hemoglobin was already dropping, and I think it had dropped below 5 at some point. And then they were just researching, doing everything. And then at night, they also wanted to do a CT scan. So they waited until when it was available. I did the CT scan, and when I did the CT scan, they didn't tell me the results right away. But at night, the hematologist on call came and spoke to me about it and was like, look, you have something called warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia. And I was like, what is that? I've never heard that. And so then she told me it's a disease where basically your body's attacking its own red blood cells, and that's why your hemoglobin is dropping. And then she's like, the number one thing we can do right now is to start you on high-dose steroids to help you make you feel better. So I said, okay. I mean, I'm in the hospital right now. Do anything to make me feel better. So she started high-dose steroids that night. And then in the morning is when the doctors came back and they wanted to talk to me about my CT scan results. And that's when they told me that they saw enlarged lymph nodes in my chest, in my neck, and like close to my stomach area. So they were worried that it was B-cell lymphoma because of the enlarged lymph nodes. So at that point, I think it was a shock to me because I was just like, what are you saying? Like, I thought this was warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia. They're like, yes, that's a precursor to B-cell lymphoma, so it could be B-cell lymphoma. At that time, the doctors were like, what we can do is just treat you with high-dose steroids, and we're going to go do a biopsy. I said, okay, let's do this. So after we were in the hospital for 3 days, they decided to do the biopsy. But when they came to do the biopsy, the doctors were like, we're too scared to do the biopsy because it's in such an area that we're scared it's going to puncture your lung, your stomach in certain areas, and we don't want to do that. So they're like, do you just want to go ahead with treatment and see how, like, if it resolves with the steroids, if it's just the wAIHA? And that's a decision me and my husband took. We were like, okay, let's just go ahead with the treatment. So I was on high dose steroids, almost like 60 milligrams per day for over 4 weeks. And in between that, I had graduated from pharmacy school. Everything was good. And my numbers were going up, looking good. Everything was fine. And then as soon as the hematologist was like at 4 weeks, she was like, I want to taper the steroids and see how you do. Tapering, she started tapering. And then after she got to tapering at about like a week or two later, that's when my numbers started dipping again. So at that time, we were like, okay, well, obviously the steroids aren't working. What's my next step? So I was given the option by my hematologist was either rituximab or a splenectomy, and I wanted to get a second opinion, so I decided to go to MD Anderson in Houston. And they said the same thing, rituximab or splenectomy. And the hematologist there specifically told me, it's like, if you want to save your organ, we can do the rituximab, and it would be this dose for 4 weeks. And that's what I decided to do. I decided to do the rituximab. So I did rituximab here at Tulane University in New Orleans, and I did that for 4 weeks while being on steroids. And it took a while for the numbers to get back up, and that was something my doctor at MD Anderson had told me, is like, you're not going to see a improvement right away. You will see an improvement anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. And I was pretty set on hoping that this was going to work. And well, luckily enough, it did work. I was basically back to remission in 12 weeks, but I still stayed on steroids the entire time until my numbers were somewhat steady, and then they started dropping the steroids. And when they started dropping the steroids, I mean, throughout this whole thing, I think the biggest side effects I had was from the steroids itself. Like, I couldn't sleep, I gained so much weight, I had the moon face, I had hair loss, tremendous amount of acne, and it was just all in all a lot. And I think the whole process, like, when I was diagnosed in towards the end of April in 2016, and I would say I was somewhat in recovery and somewhat semi back to normal by December. So it was almost, I would say, 8-month process. And then coming off the steroids was another painful situation, but I honestly thought that was the end of my journey, because I was in remission for almost 5 years. And then came 2022. April of 2022 is when, unfortunately, I had relapsed. And that came as kind of a shock, because it came so many years later from my first time that I had wAIHA. So, and my symptoms this time were a bit similar. It was during the month of Ramadan for us, and I was fasting. And I pretty much went back to my normal lifestyle. Like, I was working out, I was doing this, doing that. But of course, like, after having wAIHA, like, I realized, like, my body wasn't exactly the way it was before I had it. So in 2022, well, I was during the month of Ramadan, so, I was fasting, and I was, like, basically telling myself I was drinking enough water, so my urine started to look a little bit orange. And then My husband was like, let me just check your eyes just to be sure. At this time, my husband's a full-fledged physician, and he checked it. He's like, no, your eyes look a little yellow. He's like, just reach out to your hematologist and see, like, let them do blood work. So they did the blood work, and then from then on, I just knew if a doctor calls you right after an appointment or super early in the morning, it's bad news. And he told me, he's like, unfortunately, your wAIHA is returned. And I was just, at that point, pretty much devastated. I was like, I thought I had come, like, if I had been in remission for so long, the chances of it coming back were not that great, but it happened. So at that point, we needed to make a decision as to what would be the next step. So then I went back to MD Anderson, and that's when the doctors decided, it's like, okay, you know, at this point, we need to figure out what we can do for you. And they said the best option for me would be to do a splenectomy. And both times, one of the biggest side effects, or one of the biggest problems I had with wAIHA, is my spleen was so enlarged that I couldn't even sit down or lay down without being in tremendous amounts of pain. Like, I was not able to sleep properly for at least 6 months. I couldn't even lie down on the side. I couldn't even sit down. If I was lying, I had to lie on my right side. So, and at that point in my career in 2022, I was in a very high position in my job. I was doing very well. So I think it came as a shock to me that all of this started happening again. So we went to MD Anderson. We had our discussion about what to do. So they recommended, of course, they put me back on steroids, and they were like, okay, you can do rituximab again. And they suggested I do a lower dose because I had so much side effects from the first time, and that's what we decided to do. So again, here in New Orleans, I did the rituximab at a low dose with the steroids. But after the first 2 or 3 rounds, my numbers were declining. It was not improving at all. So that's when the doctors were like, okay, let's just try to stabilize you as best as possible. So they said, we're going to just give you at the normal dose. We said, fine. And the discussion at MD Anderson was that they wanted to do a splenectomy. They're like, I think at this point, splenectomy is the only way to go through. Me and my husband and the surgeon discussed that if we wanted to have the splenectomy, we wanted the spleen to shrink in size before we do it because my spleen was so enlarged at the time. So that's why we decided to go through the rituximab and steroid round before even thinking about going through the surgery. So we went through the round. So in the end, I ended up having 6 rounds of rituximab instead of 4, and was on even higher dose of steroids this time. It was 100 milligrams. And while I was going through this was like, COVID was still rampant. I just kept having infections. I caught COVID. I caught upper respiratory tract infection. I caught a skin infection. All of that within the span of like 6 to 8 months. Like, it was nonstop. I had to stop working. Couldn't work. I couldn't go out. I couldn't do a lot of things. Again, I had really bad side effects from steroids. It was very difficult. And then came my surgery, which was end of January of 2023, where I had a total full splenectomy at MD Anderson in Houston. After the splenectomy, I was in the hospital for about 5 days. The surgery was about 7 to 8 hours. They biopsied the splenectomy to check if there was any underlying issues, and thankfully there wasn't anything. So then after the surgery, I started to somehow recover and try to get back to normal. And that's when, a month later, I started experiencing tremendous joint pain, which I haven't experienced in my life. I was like, this is not normal. Something's going on. So the doctors at MD Anderson were like, okay, I think it's time you see a rheumatologist. So I saw a rheumatologist, and that's when they also, at that point, I was diagnosed with lupus. And so right now, my life has completely changed in the way I live my life, what I do every day, what I have to live with every day. wAIHA has taken a lot of my mental capacity. It has taken a lot of my physical capacity because I'm not myself anymore. And I think I had to go through a lot of mental therapy. I had to seek psychiatric help for that because um, I kept comparing myself to when I wasn't sick. And that was a very difficult time for me. It took almost a year and a half to 2 years of therapy to accept my new reality. And with wAIHA, it's just the physical exhaustion was the biggest thing. And now that I'm on so many type of medications, immunosuppressants for my lupus, I just tend to get sick all the time. And like, I know that having a splenectomy does improve my chances, but it's not 100% cure. So it's always in the back of my head that this can come back anytime. So living with it has taught me how to accept my new reality, and it's shown me how to have grace and take things easy, because for me, a chore that would take me 10 minutes before is now takes me half an hour to an hour, and I had to accept that. And it's very hard being diagnosed with something at a young age and then trying to live with it right now, because it affects not only my life but my family life, my social life. Now I'm limited to going out, doing certain things. I get sick at the drop of a hat. But I think having the wAIHA warriors has helped me tremendously, because before I didn't realize there were people with my disease, especially when I had it in 2016. I didn't research much about it. I didn't even know what this was when I was first diagnosed, because it was rare. But when it came time in 2022, when I relapsed, I did a quick online search, and that's when wAIHA Warriors came up. And they have been a tremendous amount of support to talk to other people that are in the same position as I am, dealing with the disease. But everyone has a different story. Everyone has a different outlook on this. And it's helped to know that I wasn't alone in this. And the thing is, it's like we focus so much on just our health that we forget about everything else around us. And I think this has made me realize how to appreciate life more. And I'm very conscious about what I do, what I eat. I try to be healthy as much as possible, but it kind of makes me realize the life I miss, what I had before. But acceptance has helped me tremendously, and living with wAIHA is now something that I know is a lifelong journey, and that's what I've come to terms with. It is always in the back of my head, but I feel like with the amount of support and now new research coming out about this disease is gonna help not only me but everyone else. But yeah, that's my story on wAIHA, and I hope my story can help others. And here's to looking forward to living with wAIHA.